Standing for the Speaker of the House of Keys.
Good morning, honourable members.
Mr. Speaker.
Please be seated.
Honourable members, please be upstanding for the President of Tynwald.
One of my, Alton, you honour roll. One. Please be seated. First of all, may I welcome everyone to Junior Tynwald. This is a real privilege and honour for me, and I know the Speaker and the members of the House of Keys and Legislative Council for you to be here. And we'll look forward to a very informative sitting. So, on our order paper, item 1 is questions, and I move to Kane to ask this question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is, what is being done to stop off-island interference in national politics?
Call on the Deputy Chief Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is a very broad question, but also a very interesting one. The first thing I think it is important to say is that the Isle of Man has a long history of political independence. If there are, or have been, attempts to interfere in Manx politics, I would question how effective these attempts referred to by the Honourable Member actually are. Mr. President, we are not immune from the broad global trends that we all see through the media, and especially through social media. The polarisation of discourse and debate, sad as it is not unique to our island. To return to the question, I have noticed an increasing trend for some off-island groups to add their voice to debates around our domestic policies. I'm thinking particularly of debates around abortion and assisted dying, for example. I would say, though, that in trying to gain public support for a cause or viewpoint, however unpalatable that might be, is not the same as interfering in Manx politics. Mr. President, in a modern and open democratic society, it is healthy that opposing views should be expressed, communicated and discussed. To try to stop that free expression of views, even if you disagree with the views, would not be in the interests of democracy. What we need to do is to balance the right to express one's views with the need to be non-discriminatory and to avoid inciting hatred or violence against certain groups of people or people who hold certain views. Mr. President, Manx politics is built on a great tradition of consensus, discourse and engagement. While we may disagree with a view, we will fight to the end to defend your right to say it. Those who come to our island, but who do not wish to listen and engage, will find their message is likely to miss the mark. I do not believe there is a risk to our politics or political system from outside interference. Thank you, Mr. President.
Supplementary, Mr. Kane.
I was specifically referring to the group Patriotic Alternative and their policies, or the policies that they referred to were antithetical to the notion of democracy. And so, while I agree with the sentiment behind what you said, I feel that fails to represent effectively what I was attempting to say.
Deputy Chief Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I did wonder whether the Honourable Member's purpose in his question was actually to allude to that recent episode that the island has experienced of delivery of leaflets from a particular off-island group. And I think actually to the point that I raised in my initial response, what I found quite interesting was the response that we saw on the Isle of Man, in our media, in fact, which I think absolutely elucidated the point I was trying to get across, that an outside group trying to encourage people on this island in a particular direction without understanding our island, without understanding our people, our society, our economy and our views, will miss the mark. And indeed it was interesting to me that commentary in our media from members of the public quite rightly pointed out that you cannot transplant and impose views from another place without coming and understanding our island and our feelings. And I'm glad to say we have had some healthy debate, which I think is representative of our strong democracy and public voice. Thank you, Mr. President.
On to question 2, and I call on Rebecca True to ask a question.
Thank you, Mr. President. My question is, what provisions will be in place at Nicholas Hospital to cope with the increased population of the island of 100,000 people?
Call on the Minister for Health and Social Care to reply.
The updated island plan approved by Tynwald on the 18th of January includes key elements of the economic strategy, such as ensuring that we plan for a future population of 100,000. It's worth noting this is not a target population. That work is only now beginning, and GP services and Nobles Hospital are some of the areas we are starting to look at. No specific work has yet been undertaken to assess the additional GP and hospital services that may be required for an increased island population of 100,000. However, some high-level estimation work was undertaken as part of the independent health review conducted by Sir Jonathan Michaels. It is worth highlighting, Mr. President, that a population number itself doesn't provide much insight into the needs of our citizens in terms of health and care. Demographic pressures on healthcare relate more to the details, such as the age breakdown of the population, rather than simply a target number. The Department of Public Health, the Transformation Programme and Max Care would work together, as well as more widely with other departments such as Home Affairs and Education, to understand the impact of the economic strategy objectives on our health services. Within the department, work has already started on our estate strategy, which will include the buildings that health and care services operate from, their use, capacity and condition in the context of the economic strategy.
Supplementary, Mr. Allen.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank the Minister for his answer today, which seems to focus on the buildings and their capacities. However, what confidence does the Minister have that it will be possible to recruit enough staff to provide services in the future to meet not only our current needs, but also the needs of an expanded population?
Minister to reply.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I don't want to jump ahead myself. There is another question on the Order paper actually specifically relating to staff retention and recruitment and attraction of young workers back to the island, so I'll try and deal with that answer as part of that work. Mr. President, but I am quite confident actually that we have recruitment plans in place, that we will have a long-term strategy that will enable us to plan for an infrastructure that supports a larger population on our island.
Supplementary, Ms. Burns.
Well, throughout my findings, I found that last year, in 2022, only one ward in the entire hospital had safe nursing levels. That was a neurology ward. Surely, if the population is 85,000, can't have safe nursing levels. If the population does in fact reach 100,000 people, how is it going to be improved and not worsened?
Minister to reply.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I think safe staffing is actually quite different from providing for a population. It doesn't matter how many people you have. On the island, there is a certain minimum number of staff you're going to need to service that population, whether it's 80, 90 or 100,000 people. But the reality is we can't meet those minimum staffing levels today. That is well acknowledged and understood. But actually there is no direct correlation, I think, between the minimum staffing levels that we have and our ability to deliver that service to a slightly larger population. One thing I would say is if you want us to recruit more nurses, more healthcare assistants, more doctors, more dentists, we're going to have to find them from somewhere. That will be bringing people onto our island, which will, by default, then grow the population. So I don't think that growing the population and solving our service delivery and staffing issues are inextricably separate issues. They are very linked, and actually we can't solve the one without the other.
We move on to question 3. I call on the Honourable Member for Legislative Council, Mr. Williams.
What plans are there to provide government-funded houses for the low-middle class?
You answer the question. I'll call on the Honourable Member for Council, Mrs. Kinch.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for the question. The Department determines eligibility for access on set criteria, which are the ability to afford housing and residency requirements, not based on a class system. The Department and local authorities provide 6,100 public sector houses to eligible applicants. There is a replacement programme in place for homes that are no longer suitable for modern public sector housing, and this will result in approximately 200 dwellings being constructed on existing sites over the next 3 years. The existing stock is supplemented with additional public sector homes wherever there is opportunity to do so. 2 schemes offer financial assistance to eligible persons to help fund the purchase of a first home. First Home Choice Scheme provides loan assistance towards the purchase of a home for sale on the open market. The First Home Fixed Scheme provides loan assistance towards approved dwellings for sale at discounted purchase prices. Currently, 99 new homes with planning approval will be built at a discounted price via the First Home Fixed Scheme, and a further 148 new homes are currently going through the planning process. There are plans to expand on the mid-rent pilot scheme, where 5 properties are currently being let in Colby at a reduced rent. This scheme lets properties out at around 80% of the market rate for a period of 2 to 3 years, and aims to make it easy for those who live in them to save a deposit to purchase their own home. Thank you, Mr. President.
Supplementary, Ms. Stewart.
Will these new houses have the similar facilities, such as being close to schools for families?
Mr. Kinish to reply.
Thank you, Mr. President. Unfortunately, I'm not in a position to state where these new properties will be developed. There are processes going through the Housing and Community Board at the moment which are identifying sites, but I cannot make any firm responses to the location of those properties. Thank you, Mr. President.
Supplementary question, Mr. Lewis.
How do you plan to bring people over to boost the population if the houses are too expensive? There's no one wants to move in.
Mr. Kinish to reply.
Thank you, Mr. President. There is, within the Housing and Community Board, ideas in order to support people. The schemes that I just referred to, the fixed scheme, they are only eligible to people when they've been resident for a particular period of time, so that does make it rather difficult. I think a lot of the schemes that are in place, for example, those through the bank development corporations, are increasing building initiatives such as the anti-property initiative, are all designed to bring more stock onto the market, which should hopefully have an effect on house prices. Thank you, Mr. President.
Move on to question 4. Call on the honourable member to Glenveigh and Peel. Ms. Etts.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to ask how the government plans to ensure that everyone can access menstrual products.
Call on the Minister of Health and Social Care to reply.
I've deferred to colleagues in public health to provide a view who confirm that they are not currently developing anything specific in this area, despite general support for the introduction of schemes to relieve period poverty on the Isle of Man. The concept of period poverty is well recognised globally and can be associated with decreased school attendance, anxiety, shame, bullying and negative health outcomes. Public health does not have any specific data on the breadth of the problem locally. However, it can be assumed that this is a challenge faced by people on the Isle of Man, as it is across the rest of the UK, particularly in recognition of the rising cost of living.
Supplementary, Ms. Head.
Thank you, Mr. President. From my research, I found that Scotland has introduced a scheme where anyone that menstruates can access the products for free. So I was wondering if the government would be willing in the future to offer any kind of support to buy these products which are necessary.
Minister to reply.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I think when developing any kind of policy, especially something which will be publicly funded, the first question to answer is there a problem and what is the scale of the problem? And I think at the moment we don't have answers to those questions. We can assume that there is a problem here based on statistical information, based on comparisons to other jurisdictions like the United Kingdom. But at present, actually, I've not seen any evidence to demonstrate that there is a need here, as there was in Scotland, when Scotland did legislate for this. However, it isn't something the department is opposed to, but I think if we can find that there is a rational reason for doing this, that we would have to introduce primary legislation as they did in Scotland in order to provide authorities on the Isle of Man to provide these products for free. And that is not something that we're currently working on, but like I said, Mr. President, I'm more than happy to consider it.
Supplementary question, Mr. Cowan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Sorry, lost my question. My question to the Minister is whether he thinks it is acceptable to rely on such charities as the Red Box to supply period products.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think it's a difficult question to answer because I think we'd all recognise that charities have an important place to play in society. They often do things government can't do. They can often act quicker, more flexibly, be more generous in some cases. Any government-provided scheme, by its very nature, would have rules, restrictions, requirements built in, whereas charities don't have those same sort of governance requirements. They can be much more responsive, I think, than perhaps the public sector is able to do. So whether or not there is a place for charities to provide these services and this support, I think is a good question. But no, when it is something that affects the housing of so many people, it should be, in my view, provided by the state, by the government. Like I've said, Mr. President, it's the view of this honourable court that we should investigate this. I'm more than happy to pick one of my political members and to go away and actually do this work. I'm struggling not to look at the political members to the right, but I've got no problem at all in principle in doing a bit more work on it.
Move on to question 5. I call on the honourable member for Douglas South. Mr. Gowan.
Thank you, Mr. President. I beg to ask how the government intends to improve food security.
Call on the member for Environment, Food and Agriculture, Dr. Hayward, to reply.
Thank you, Mr. President. Our food security plan will be published in October 2023. It's clear that an increase in Manx food production focused on import substitution will be a key aim within that plan, and actions to achieve that are being identified. This will assist in building further resilience of supply in the local food. The pandemic demonstrated quite clearly the importance of food security, highlighting the complex transportation network that underpins a global food industry. And it showed that at times of crisis, food produced on Ireland that may otherwise be exported could be diverted to support our resident population. This further underlines the importance of a sustainable agriculture and food industry for our island. What we do know is that as an island, it's not realistic to seek to achieve full self-sufficiency without significant changes to our dietary choices. Our modern diets and reliance on supermarkets and wholesalers mean that whilst we're able to produce a great deal of food and drink staples like meat, seafood, milk, cheese, root vegetables, grains and seasonal fruit, we will remain reliant on strong logistical links to the UK and the rest of the world for elements of our weekly shop, and for foods which we've become accustomed to. Everyday foods like rice, bananas, dry pasta, chocolate and even tins of beans will continue to need to be imported. As set out in my department's plan for 2023-24, our focus is on increasing the volume of homegrown produce and increasing the GDP of the sector, both of which will assist in strengthening our food security. In addition, the department continues to champion local, sustainable, seasonal produce through a range of support and schemes and via the annual Food and Drink Festival. Thank you.
Supplementary, Mr. Gowan.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have reason to believe last week no beef was processed in the Isle of Man meat plant. However, I'm sure much was imported on the steam packet, and much of this would have been used in many government buildings. In relation to the import substitution, how much Manx produce is actually used in the likes of school meals and meals in the government cafeteria, and is the government actually doing as they say? Thank you.
Call on the member for Defra to reply.
Thank you. I think there have been well documented concerns about the meat plant, and I'm pleased to see that there are new management positions being appointed there, and hopefully that should see a change. There are lots of reasons why producers choose not to send animals to the meat plant, some of them choosing to export them off island, and it tends to be a bit of an ebb and flow about the different days on which animals are processed there. I am not sure on figures for the how much Manx produce is used within the government, but I will undertake to find out that figure and get back to you.
Supplementary, Mr. Gowan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would the Minister agree with me that the term food security is often misunderstood and misused, and instead confused with food sovereignty? Further, would the Minister also agree that the World Food Summit definition of food security focuses on the physical and financial access of food? Food inflation is at some of the highest levels seen in decades, and would the Minister agree with me that the high food inflation disproportionately affects low-income households, thus decreasing their food security?
Defra to reply.
I thank the honourable member for his question. I'll be having words with him later. It is indeed true that there is commonly confusion over the term food security, and you are right to quote the World Food Summit. They looked at 4 aspects of food security and said it was about physical availability, which addresses that supply side, economic and physical access to food. Just because there's food available doesn't mean that you can afford to put it on your table. And food utilisation, how well you're using that food and whether it is safe and nutritious.
And then all of those three things need to be stable over time in order for us to have food security. And you are right to identify that the current economic climate is affecting food production. Many businesses are struggling to maintain their margin due to increased costs, the cost of energy, imported feed, fertiliser, spares, packaging, logistics, all of those have gone up, and that's putting real pressure, and we've seen serious food inflation. So it can be really, really challenging, especially for the smaller scale producers like we have here on the Isle of Man, to maintain their own margins and to protect that supply. But the department continues to work with those small producers in order to maintain as much food security as we can here on the island with regards to local production.
Move on to question 6. I call on the Honourable Member for Middle, Mr. Ames.
Thank you, Mr. President. What, if anything, is being done to improve the situation regarding the mental health of young people, and whether the medical cannabis is available as a way of treating depression, and if not, what considerations have been given to making it available for this purpose?
Call on the Minister for Health and Social Care to reply.
It is well documented in this Honourable Court that more work, more funding and more resource is required to improve support for children and young people with emotional well-being and mental health needs, particularly those who have been referred to the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Service and have been waiting for more than 37 weeks to receive support. Manx Care is currently looking to implement the Thrive framework, a national model that has had significant success in reducing waiting times for mental health services in the UK, and is billed as the beginning of a transformational system change that also promotes timely intervention and prevents the progression of problems that require more acute support. The Department is also working cross-government and with partners to publish a mental health strategy and delivery plan in December 2023 aimed at improving mental health and well-being for our population in the years to come. Turning to cannabis, whilst cannabis-based products for medicinal use, or CBPM, is considered as a potential treatment option for some psychiatric conditions, including depression, the NHS does not currently fund the prescribing of CBPM products to patients due to the fact CBPMs are unlicensed medicines and have not been assessed whether medicines regulated for safety, quality or efficiency. Currently, the method to acquire CBPM is via private prescription. For children and adolescents under 18 years of age, CBPMs can only be prescribed by a paediatric specialist within their field of expertise. Who am I, actually?
Thank you. I've spoken in the past weeks to other students from Q2, both in year 12, 11 and 10, and all feel that the few that have received support have felt that it was inadequate and feel as though they were treated as just a number on a piece of paper and weren't taken into consideration as a person.
Question to that? Minister to reply? It's not a statement really, so do you have a question, Mr. Ames?
Well, you can do that.
Thank you. Very helpful. Minister to reply.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I would like to say, actually, I'm sorry to hear that. I really am. Like I said, we've acknowledged, I think it's well acknowledged and understood that our mental health services are under-resourced, understaffed, under-prioritised, under-supported. And that goes, therefore, for anyone that needs to use them. This is not news to anyone who has tried to access mental health support on the Isle of Man, especially via CAMS. This is a problem that has been building for years. It is, in my view, as a result of significant underinvestment in our services over the last decade. Not trying to shy away from this fact, Mr. President, it is a problem that will take time to fix. Manx Care are doing their best, I think, within the resources they have, the plans that we have to roll out the Thrive framework and to reposition our mental health model away from one of medication and one towards therapeutic support and treatment is the right move, but it will take time to fully implement. What I would suggest, if the Honourable Member has any direct experience, or anyone who does have direct experience of these problems, please encourage them to get in touch. The Department is actively working on a mental health strategy, and our engagement forum is more than happy to talk to service users, to patients, to anyone who feels like they've been let down by the current services, in order to try and make sure we build and improve these services for the future.
Move on to question 7. I call on the Honourable Member for Douglas South, Ms. Harris.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. My question is, what is the assessment on the effect that the teacher strikes have had on the students' learning, and what plans are in place to increase teachers' pay to prevent any further negative effects in the future?
Call on the Minister for Education, Sport and Culture to reply.
Thank you, Mr President, and I thank the Honourable Questioner for the question today. My department are in regular contract with the Nazareth Teaching Union regarding their dispute and remains committed to resolving all issues that have been raised. My department believe that these discussions are productive, but whilst these discussions are ongoing, I am unable to answer any further on those talks as they remain confidential. Schools endeavour to operate as normal as possible throughout the ongoing situation, and the safeguarding and well-being of all of our students is of paramount importance in any of the decisions that are being made. Schools are best placed to identify any impact on the individual students and adjust provision accordingly. The department works closely with schools to help support and enable them to address any negative impact, including special services where appropriate. I understand the impact that this is having on all of our students and parents, and can only apologise for this. The department is doing all it can to achieve a resolution to the dispute. With regards to plans to increase teachers' pay, at the end of 2022, every teacher and lecturer on the Isle of Man received a pay rise of between 8% and 11.9%. This was implemented after 4 of the island's 5 recognised teaching and lecturing trade unions accepted the government's pay offer. It means that any newly qualified teacher working on the Isle of Man will have a starting salary of £36,557. In comparison, in England and outside of London, the starting salary for a teacher is £28,000. The new pay scale should act as a significant incentive, attracting teachers to the island while helping to retain those that are already working here. The increase in teachers' salaries, which varies depending on pay band, was backdated to the 1st of September 2022, with all arrears being paid as a lump sum in February 2023. Thank you, Mr President.
Supplementary, Ms Harris? Supplementary, Mr Cowan.
Thank you, Mr President. Will the Minister also acknowledge that children's learning and school experience has also been affected by a long-running work to rule imposed by the unions and several lockdowns? What plans does the Minister have to ensure that this doesn't become the lost generation?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr President. As I've said, we are still in dispute, so I cannot continue to talk with regards to any of the dispute. But certainly it's the intention of myself and to be honest, all honourable members of Tynwald to ensure that we have the right resources in place to support all of our students so that they get the progress and can move on to the further education or into the workplace with the best skills possible, and we will do everything we can to support that to ensure they have that right progress.
On to question 8, to call on the Honourable Member for Legislative Council, Ms Duckworth.
Thank you, Mr President. I would like to ask what is being done to encourage the younger demographic to return to the island.
Call on the Member for Enterprise, Mrs Corner, to reply.
Thank you, Mr President. I thank the Honourable Member of Council for the question. In November 2022, Tynwald approved the government's ambitious economic strategy. This strategy, along with the Island Plan, recognises and seeks to address the ageing population and increasing dependency ratio by setting bold objectives to rebalance the island's population through the attraction and retention of more young people. Financial packages are offered as incentives, and the National Insurance Holiday, which is available to eligible students, young professionals and new residents. It offers up to $4,400 a year per person I should say, with a gross salary earning more than $23,000. In response to the approval of the economic strategy, Locate reviewed the graduate ecosystem initiative to readjust its scope to focus on attracting and retaining more new, returning and existing graduates and young professionals. Since the review's completion, Locate has been working towards its delivery and is in the process of hiring a development officer to work both on and off the island to liaise with young people to raise awareness of the island's proposition and to encourage both the return of our own and the relocation of new students from elsewhere. In order to gather valuable insights and feedback from young professionals and graduates, Locate has launched a Graduates and Young Professionals Survey in partnership with UCM. So far, nearly 400 young people living on and off Ireland have participated in the survey, and this data will help shape the initiatives and programmes offered by Locate to better meet the needs of this target group. The Department's Policy and Strategy Division is currently reviewing and exploring numerous potential policy options to improve the attractiveness of the Isle of Man as a destination for young people, and it expects to make further recommendations in this direction over the coming months. Recognising that ultimately many of the issues quoted by students, such as housing, transport, leisure facilities, sit across government in many policy areas. The government will continue to work across work streams and explore any new opportunities that may arise to work towards the achievement of greater attention of the younger demographic. And I would welcome, genuinely welcome, further discussion on this topic from young members of this Honourable Court after the conclusion of the sitting. Thank you, Mr. President.
Supplementary. Go for it.
I've spoken to many of my fellow pupils, and many feel as though there's very little room for growth and opportunity within higher education and in job vacancies for fields they're interested in. And I was wondering if there's anything put in place to address this.
And the French pastor to reply.
Thank you, Mr. President. Sorry, So, yes, I think we work closely with education to try to provide opportunities for people for higher education, and not only by university but by vocational studies, to try to give more opportunity for young people to engage and to improve their futures. This is really important. And what I would say to the Honourable Member, I think we have to absolutely acknowledge that more must be done. And I genuinely welcome suggestions from any areas. And you know what I would say to Honourable Members of this Court this morning is that the future is yours, and we must engage, and most importantly, listen to the views of our young people, not just to create opportunities for you, but actually to create opportunities with you.
Supplementary. Ms. Hewitt.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would argue that people, obviously, they want to go to university abroad because for the educational opportunity, but they're also very much so attracted by the bright city lights. Now, would you ever encourage implementing this on the island, even though it may affect the culture of the island?
And the French pastor reply.
Thank you, Mr. President. And what I was thinking is often leisure facilities, nightlife, those are the things that are put forward as the reasons why we can't attract people. And I think, you know, the problem with creating those opportunities for that bright life, the nightlife, the leisure opportunities, it's about critical mass for businesses, really, isn't it? And, you know, there has to be a critical mass in order to make those businesses viable. And there are grants and loans offered to businesses to set up. But again, viability is really important. And I think government's job really is to help facilitate that where possible, and to kind of set the stage, and to create an environment where businesses can be successful and therefore provide those opportunities, particularly for young people. And I think you could argue that it's kind of chicken and egg, but I think we do have to put up the hen house and lay out the straw.
Move on to question 9. I call on the Honourable Member for Alcon, Ms. Lillan.
Thank you. What action is planned to address on the staffing in men's care, and in particular to encourage young people trained in health and social care professions to return to the island?
Call on the Minister for Health and Social Care to reply.
There are a number of initiatives underway across several clinical disciplines within Manx Care to address their underlying vacancy factor, which is currently running at around 20% across the organisation. These initiatives include doubling of places available within the Manx Care School of Nursing, coupled with an increase in the annual bursary from £5,000 to £10,000. Engagement with international recruitment agencies to hire nursing staff trained in countries outside the UK to come here to work for Manx Care. We've already welcomed around 20 new nurses through this route so far, and we've recently announced a paramedic training course, which will be jointly delivered by the Isle of Man Ambulance Service and the Wrexham Glyndŵr University to train up the paramedics of tomorrow. Manx Care are supporting several midwifery care assistants who undertake their 3-year midwifery training at the University of Salford, with their clinical placements done within the Manx Care maternity service. Rotational posts on offer for newly qualified physiotherapists, occupational therapists and speech therapists. These posts provide exposure across a range of settings such as community, hospital and in specialist practice. An island-based social worker programme is currently delivered in conjunction with Napier University in Scotland, with clinical placements undertaken across both adults and children's social work teams and academic work undertaken remotely. In terms of attracting Manx people back to the island who have gained a health and social care qualification off-island, our rates of pay tend to be higher than in the UK, and we offer a generous relocation package including support for relocation or buying a new house on the island, as well as housing assistance for the first 3 years. In addition, most clinical roles are eligible for a £3,000 golden hello, which is payable £1,000 a year for the first 3 years of employment. Mr. President, we've also just heard from the Honourable Member for the Department for Enterprise, who has outlined a broad range of other work that is currently underway, designed to attract young professionals back to the island.
Supplementary, Ms. Ellie.
Thank you, Mr. President. Manx Care has about double UK vacancy rate. So when are we expected to see our vacancy rate drop to similar to what was in
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. President. That's a really good question to ask. My understanding is the workforce programme that Manx Care have is multi-year, so it will take a number of years to bring ourselves up to where we need to be. We've heard talk already this morning in this honourable court around the concept of safe staffing. That is ultimately Manx Care's aim, is to make sure our substantive establishment within the organisation is safe and can enable us to deliver services safely. I think straight line comparisons to the UK are somewhat difficult because of the nature of what we do on the Isle of Man. So the Isle of Man provides an integrated health service in terms of health and social care being provided by Manx Care as an organisation. In the UK, most of these services are provided by various other bodies, so local authority trusts, for example, NHS trusts. Some are now being provided by integrated care boards, but in that respect, we are further down this journey than the UK is. And so in some areas, our staffing is definitely lower than in the UK. In other areas, it is more likely to be comparable, so it's not quite as straightforward as giving a straight line comparison with a similarly sized area within the United Kingdom. But in short, it will take a number of years, Mr. President.
Supplementary, Mr. Cowan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Could the Minister confirm whether similar bursaries are provided to not just clinical roles but also to allied health professionals such as radiographers or physiotherapists?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. President. I can't confirm that, as I don't actually know the answer. I will endeavour to find out and have a response circulated if possible. My understanding is that the bursary system is very specific to the training of nurses. It's part of the LCN nurse training programme. Other professions are trained in different ways, so they'll have different requirements for training contracts, different levels of pay. It isn't quite as simple as just saying what works over here on the left will also work for somebody else on the right. So I'll try and find a definite answer, but my understanding at present is there is no similar bursary scheme, but there will undoubtedly be similar training opportunities for people in those professions on the moment.
Supplementary, Ms. Ellie.
Thank you, Mr. President. The CQC recently released that there have been safeguarding concerns, staff training concerns, etc. In our Manx Care system. So in the meantime, as I said, it will take a number of years for these issues to be resolved. How can we ensure that we are getting safe and effective healthcare?
Minister to reply.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Slightly outside the scope of the question around understanding, but I'll try and answer with what I've got. It's not quite as straightforward as saying you have X number of staff and therefore the service is safe or unsafe. Manx Care do a lot of work around moving staff around between services. A lot of it is down to the acuity of patients, so how unwell patients are in a particular area. The worse patients are, the more staff, the more care they need. Better patients obviously need less care. So it isn't quite as straightforward as applying a sort of mathematical formula saying you have X number of patients, therefore you need Y number of staff. The issues that I think were highlighted by the CQC, though, do lay bare some of the concerns that we have around the way that Manx Care currently operates, the way that the Department of Health previously operated, and again, I come back to comments I made earlier around systemic underfunding of the health and care system. You cannot solve problems that have been 10 years in the making overnight. It will take time to do some of these things, to fix some of these problems. I am confident, though, that when Manx Care are delivering services, they are doing so safely within the remit of their requirements and set down in the mandate or in the legislation. Again, how they manage that is very much by making conscious clinical decisions on whether services themselves are safe to run. So there have been quite well trialled public information around some services Manx Care is supposed to be providing, but is choosing not to because they openly admitted they can't provide that service safely. I'm talking about home births here. There's been a very conscious decision to say if we cannot provide a service safely, we will not provide that service, we will find an alternative. And that is the ultimate reassurance that I think I can provide as an old court that says where Manx Care is unable to safely deliver a service, they will make a very difficult decision to say, I cannot deliver this safely, therefore we must find an alternative.
Well, supplementary, Ms. Perry.
Is there any possibility of Middle Hospital becoming a teaching hospital to encourage young healthcare professionals to come back to Beckenham and still be able to progress their careers?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. President. Nobles Hospital is, in fact, a teaching hospital. We teach and train nurses, we train midwives, we train a variety of clinical placements, we train F1 doctors, junior doctors, we have a GP training programme, some of which have actually won awards recently in the UK for the quality of the delivery of the training programme. So one of the things that we are very good at on the Isle of Man is training people in the clinical space. Something that is, I think, widely acknowledged. Some of these courses are massively oversubscribed as well by the demand. We can only offer so many places. Like I said in the original answer, we doubled the number of places available within the nursing programme. Those, as far as I'm aware, were all snapped up relatively quickly. So we do an extraordinary amount of training in Ireland, given our small scale. We are looking to expand that. So we are looking to expand our medical programme. So, for example, that's training junior doctors. How many more doctors can we train and get more rotations? The bottleneck there will be accommodation, which we've already heard there are issues in terms of housing delivery in Ireland. So to provide the honourable member with some reassurance, we are very much already a training hospital, and if anybody wants to undertake clinical and medical training in the Isle of Man, it's definitely the place to be.
Move on to question 10. I call on the honourable member for Douglas North, Mr. Abraham.
In an increasingly diverse and secular society, what place is there for Christianity in the political system?
Honourable Lord, Speaker of the House of Peace, to reply.
By way of background, the Bishop is a member of Tynwald and the Legislative Council who can speak and vote. The House of Keys has a chaplain who can neither speak nor vote. Sittings of all three chambers start with prayers, and Tynwald Day begins with church service. Our democratic institutions are a reflection of our society. For much of Tynwald's 1,000-year history, the mountain population have been a strongly religious community. The diversity of religious affiliation has certainly grown significantly in the last century as congregation numbers in the established Methodist Church have shrunk. Despite this, over half the population identified as Christian in the last census. Being a Christian will have meant something different to everyone completing that question, but at its core there will be a common set of values that are enough to coalesce under the title Christian. These will have no doubt assisted in forming the beliefs and values of the individual to a greater or lesser extent. Some will feel that the Bishop directly represents their religious views in Tynwald. Some will feel that he represents a broader religious sentiment, irrespective of doctrinal differences. Some, like me, are Christians, but do not feel that there is a representative role for the Bishop, a voice, if not a vote, if you will. Within Keys, a majority of members opted to retain prayers, but make pragmatic changes to those that do not wish to participate, so that they can be accommodated. I have no doubt that as our society continues to change, so too will sentiment around this subject.
Thank you, Mr. President. My question to the Speaker is that what findings from the 2021 census, as you highlighted, show that the island is majoritively Christian, and though that is shrinking, those of the age bracket coming to be voting are significantly less Christian. What plans does the government have in place to incentivise new voters to participate in a system where they are less likely to be represented by their views?
Lord Speaker to reply.
I may disappoint the honourable member that I'm unable to speak on behalf of the government in my current role, But in terms of encouraging participation, I think one of the things that we have seen, and one of the things that sparked this debate within Tynwald and within the House of Keys, has been a lowering of the average age of Tynwald. Tynwald is now a far more diverse body than it has been in the past, and certainly compared to when I joined it in 2006, with an average age now probably 50 or lower rather than 65 and over. I think if I remember when I joined the House of Keys, I single-handedly brought the average age down to 57. So we've come a long way, I think, in recent years, and may still have further to go, but that goes to show that we are reflective of society as a whole, and as a result, the membership and the composition of Tynwald Court will continue to change and reflect that as that changes.
Supplementary, Mr. King?
Even assuming that thank you, Mr. President, even assuming that the majority of the population are Christian, considering the fact that that's in decline, and also the fact that religion as a basis for government is fundamentally undemocratic, how do we intend to move forward?
Will the Speaker to reply?
Well, like many other members in this place, I agree that the way forward was to remove the vote from the bishop, so that he would still have a voice in here, and that take that incremental step towards secularising politics. So the only other example I can find of outside of the United Kingdom of religious participation in Parliament was in Iran. Perhaps wasn't the best example to pick from. So I think this is something that is definitely in the hands of honourable members, and as honourable members change and their views change, so to this perspective.
We move on to question 11. Call on the honourable member for Russian, Mr. Clark.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to ask the Minister, does he believe that the island has sufficient commissioner housing stock to meet projected demand?
Call on the member for Infrastructure, Mrs. Gaines, to reply.
Thank you, Mr. President. Public sector housing is always in demand, and the recent cost of living crisis has also impacted waiting list totals. At the end of 2018-19, the total applications on the waiting list for general needs and for older persons housing across all of the island's housing providers was 685, whereas that total had risen to 789 by the end of 2022-23. In order to understand better what the current and projected housing needs are for the island's population, the Cabinet Office and the Housing and Communities Board have recently commissioned an objective assessment of housing needs to be carried out. This assessment will examine the housing needs across the island, the public sector, other types of affordable housing provision, private rental and private ownership. Also, the type of housing that people will need in the future will be examined. Local authorities across the island are also carrying out major capital projects to improve or replace their housing stock, and some projects will produce additional stock. Thank you, Mr. President.
Supplementary, Mr. Clark.
According to the now former Minister, as of May this year, there are over 800 people on public housing waiting lists, despite the fact that as of May, there are roughly 135 vacant public sector homes across the island. So does the Minister agree that this shows governmental failures to house those already in need, let alone those in the future?
Member for Infrastructure to reply.
Thank you, Mr. President. The figures that were given to me were at 789, not at 800. I'm unaware of the current vacant properties. Clearly, there is work that needs to be done to address vacant properties, and the length of time sometimes that it takes to turn those properties around and enable people to occupy those properties. I'm sure as part of that objective assessment of housing needs, those points will be considered as part of that review and reported on. Thank you, Mr. President.
Supplementary, Mr. Clark.
In addition to this, there appears to be blatant failures by some local authorities on public housing, for example, Port Erin. According to Godfrey Egie, the chairman of Port Erin Commissioners, 5% of the authority's 215 public houses are empty, well above the 2% threshold set by the government. So I'd like to ask the Minister, what does she plan to do to tackle local authorities, such as Port Erin Commissioners, and their ongoing failure to provide public housing for those in need?
Member for Infrastructure to reply.
Thank you. I think that the points, thank you, Mr. President, that the points that have been raised, I would have to take back to the department in order to take a view on that and to understand how they will work with local authorities to overcome these issues. Thank you, Mr. President.
Move on to question 12. I call on the Honourable Member for Douglas North, Mr. Sale.
Thank you, Mr. President. What measures the department is taking to ensure that there is a sufficient affordable housing available and that any new housing adheres to the principles of sustainability?
Call on the Member for Infrastructure, Mrs. Finch, to reply.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Cabinet Office and the Housing and Communities Board have commissioned, as I said in an earlier question, an objective assessment of housing needs to examine the Highlands housing need for different types of housing provision. This will inform the Department's strategic work for future planning of affordable housing. The term affordable housing refers to housing that receives a form of subsidy or discount for the occupant's benefit. Strict eligibility criteria apply, including maximum income thresholds and residency requirements. Types of affordable housing include public sector housing, first-time buyer housing and mid-rent housing. The focus is on replacing unsuitable homes with homes to be built to modern standards, applying thermal and sustainability standards in excess of minimum building regulations requirements. Fossil fuel heating systems will also be banned in the near future. As I answered in an earlier question, there are a number of schemes in place to support affordability for housing, such as the shared equity purchase assistance schemes, with a number of buildings, properties in the planning process and a number with planning approval already to be built. Thank you, Mr. President.
Supplementary, Mr. Sale.
Thank you, Mr. President. How does the government define sustainability in context to housing?
Member for Infrastructure to reply.
Sustainability obviously feeds from climate change initiatives and materials. So working closely with other departments such as the Department of Environment, principles, regulations, legislation, all set standards in order to determine what those standards should be. And of course, those would have to be complied with in future developments. Thank you, Mr. President.
Supplementary, Mr. Sale.
Do you think with the current standards of living crisis that sustainable housing and affordable housing can both be brought into the island?
Member for Infrastructure to reply.
I think the current view, thank you, Mr. President, the current view with sustainability is if we look historically, when you look at things such as solar panels, the cost of those particular systems were always rather expensive initially, but the more of those that are produced and developed, the cost of those come down over time, and I think that would apply to other materials, but I can't comment really broadly on what those costs would be. I think when you look at the shared equity purchase schemes, those particular costs wouldn't necessarily be fed straight into the purchase price, so they wouldn't impact on those buyers. But as I said, I think as these things become more commonplace, it's a supply and demand situation, so prices will be affected accordingly. Thank you, Mr. President.
We move on to question 13. I call on the Honourable Member for Douglas Central, Mr. Quillian.
Thank you, Mr. President. What strategies are in place to improve the crime detection rate?
Call on the Minister for Justice and Home Affairs to reply.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and thank you for the question to the Honourable Member. Whilst I am always keen to drive improved performance in the constabulary, I think it is important to consider this question in context. Although there are variations between the Isle of Man and England and Wales in terms of both legislation and available statistical outcomes to crime, it is generally accepted that the Isle of Man detection rate is already extremely high. Since 2020, the detection rate on the island has risen from 43% to 48%, whilst the trend of the number of crimes committed per annum is falling slightly. By comparison, whilst it is difficult to accurately summarise the detection rate in England and Wales, the Home Office reported in March 2022 that 5.6% of all crimes resulted in a charge and/or summons outcome. There are, having said that, a number of strategies to maintain or improve the detection rate, which fall into two main categories. The first, accurate and consistent recording of crime in line with what the public would expect of the constabulary, and secondly, dedicating resources to where they are most needed. The start of the financial year in 2023 saw the introduction of a renewed version of crime counting rules in the Isle of Man. Historically, the Isle of Man has looked to the UK Home Office counting rules and made adaptations where legislation wasn't available on the island or a theme didn't exist in the same way. The new counting rules are more suited to the Isle of Man and should also provide more meaningful data to the Manx public. There is also a team of staff in the Crime Management Unit of the Isle of Man Constabulary that ensure that crimes are recorded properly. The Constabulary believes that the Manx public would want to see that people who have committed a crime should face a suitable criminal justice process. The new recording rules aim to ensure that the police record the offence which would actually be prosecuted in any given scenario. They also include, as reported crime, some distinct Manx offences, such as provoking behaviour, which are not comprehended in the UK framework. This will improve the connection between crimes recorded and court outcomes. This will be brought under the spotlight in the next Chief Constable's annual report and is likely to affect the detection rate. However, the aim is to provide the Manx public with more relevant data rather than to affect the detection rate. The second area is also a consistent feature throughout the Chief Constable's strategy, utilising the right agency for the right task. Empowering decision makers to signpost calls for service to the most appropriate agency and only deploying police resources to where they are required. This will allow officers to spend more time on their core business of protecting vulnerable people, tackling criminality and reducing harm. This is also likely to assist in maintaining or improving the detection rate. Thank you, Mr. President.
Supplementary, Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. With the development of artificial intelligence, what, if any, plans do the Department of Justice and Home Affairs have to implement this?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. President. What an excellent question. I think, in common with all of government and society, artificial intelligence is going to fundamentally start changing and informing how we approach policy making and indeed data collection and analysis. The one thing I would say as far as the constabulary is concerned is they already have quite a sophisticated approach to data capture and analysis, and if the Honourable Member hasn't had the opportunity, I would encourage him and all Honourable Members to read the latest Chief Constable's annual report, which is data rich. So we already are very well informed around criminality, harm and so on, which serves us well. I think in terms of actually how it will make a difference, how artificial intelligence might make a difference as to the process of understanding and recording crime. At the moment there is a strong human element in that, because it is police experience and knowledge that considers what a witness or an individual reports, but also assesses the strength of viability, any evidence around that and so on. So it's a very interesting question as to when and whether artificial intelligence can become a meaningful way of processing and recording that sort of reporting of criminality. But I don't necessarily see that changing in the short term, but I think he raises a very good point. Thank you, Mr. President.
Move on to question 14, and I call on the Honourable Member for Mr. Cassidy.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to ask, is there a government strategy for electric vehicle charging?
Call on the Chair of the Climate Change Board to reply.
Thank you, Mr. President. At present, there is no official cross-government strategy that covers the installation of EV charging points. However, the approach being taken by Manx Utilities follows industry best practice and aims to stay ahead of demand. The principal installer here of public pay-as-you-go EV chargers is Manx Utilities. MU aims to maintain a ratio of 1 public charge point for each 10 electric vehicles based on industry best practice, and this is being achieved. As of 30th of June, 1,148 EVs were registered and 119 public chargers have been installed. MU select locations for charging points based on multiple factors, including geographical spread to create an all-island network to meet increasing customer demand and avoid range anxiety, site suitability to afford 24-hour availability for practical and convenient public access, including disabled access. Some local authorities also provide public EV charging points. Transport is the island's third largest source of emissions, and EVs will play an important role in decarbonising this sector. The Climate Change Plan 2022 to 2027 has the following actions. Transport strategy to deliver 15% sector reduction by 2027, to be underway by 2024, informed by the Strategic Transport Decarbonisation Review to be completed in 2023. And also to ensure that electric vehicle charging infrastructure is in place to meet increasing demand. Work on the transport decarbonisation scenarios is almost complete, and the Climate Change Transformation team will work closely with the Department of Infrastructure and Manx Utilities in relation to ensuring a strategic approach to EV charging alongside the wider transport decarbonisation strategy. Thank you, Mr. President.
Members, that concludes our question time for this morning. Yes, Mr. Payne, would you like to ask a question?
Thank you, Mr. President. My question is, well, even though this is a very good strategy and has a lot of benefits, one of the main issues with EVs fundamentally is that you aren't actually reducing the overall emissions, you're just outsourcing, as lithium battery manufacturing is one of the most polluting industries. So my question is, how does the island intend to move away from lithium batteries and towards more investment in public transport?
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank the Honourable Member for that question. We are at the start of gathering the data and information following a company that's been commissioned to help us develop our transport decarbonisation scenarios, and that will inform the strategies that we put in place to move forward. And I appreciate the concerns over lithium in its collection and involvement in EVs, and also the EVs emissions in their manufacture. But all vehicles, all products have emissions in the manufacture, and we will follow best practice. Hydrogen technology, for instance, may come in the future, or fuel cells for replacement vehicles for fossil fuel ICE cars as standard. But the island is gearing up for what is available right now, and the transport decarbonisation strategy that will follow gathering all the possible scenarios is going to be critical in the journey that we take forward. And I completely agree with the Honourable Member that our public transport offering is going to be key in that. To reduce individual journeys is really helpful in reducing our emissions across the island, and we look forward to those coming forward in the autumn. Thank you, Mr. President.
Honourable Members, we move on to item 2, Transport and Communications Infrastructure. I call on the Honourable Member for Carl, Ms. Reader, to move.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members of Tynwald, it is clear to all of us that the island requires good communication and transport links in order for us to thrive, especially if we are to meet the goals as laid out in the Isle of Man, our island plan. This is key to creating a prosperous and sustainable future for our island. The Isle of Man is known for its financial, gaming, legal and offshore sectors as we redevelop our strength as a tourist destination. A well-connected Isle of Man would open us up for new opportunities to attract businesses, investors and tourists to the Isle of Man. Ultimately, a stronger economy will mean increased prosperity, a higher standard of living, and will allow us to meet our island plan. However, it has become clear to me that we have a significant issue with transportation on the Isle of Man. The question is where we begin when we look at the transportation and the infrastructure on our beautiful island. I think that it's best to start off with our island plan, a key component of this place building great communities at its heart. However, where are we? Waiting for a transport strategy that has been place marked for 2024, something that could end up being kicked into the long grass. The Isle of Man airport fiasco, a surreal and frustrating caper that simply does not fit into our plan to grow the island. The Minister has gone on record to tell the population that there is simply not enough air traffic staff to maintain the airport day to day. This indicates a significant failure in workforce planning by a government that claims to have a plan for our island. An airport that is not open is simply jaw-dropping and indicates that we are closed to businesses. Furthermore, flying to and from the Isle of Man has become a lottery, with only a 9 in 10 chance of being able to leave or return to the Isle of Man, with 10.1% of flights cancelled and an even greater number that do not leave on time. Without the ability to be able to get to the other islands that surround us, the island plan is bound to fail. The Isle of Man, for many people, will be seen as a gilded cage. If it were only the airport, we might be able to take a small measure of comfort. However, we can look at the physical infrastructure of the Isle of Man and see that we have an increase in the number of roads where the conditions have deteriorated. This is particularly concerning as we move towards our net zero goals. New electric cars, being heavier, will increase the load on roads, and we need to be more proactive in repairing and rebuilding our roads. Too many of our roads are in need of renewal. Patching and surface dressing are short-term solutions, and it is clear that a strategy to rebuild our roads is fundamental to building a great community on the Isle of Man. The Isle of Man's Our Island Plan's strategic outline lays out the aspiration for sustainable growth, improved quality of life, and enhanced connectivity. It is my view that there has been a failure to demonstrate a commitment to realising these goals and objectives. There is growing feeling that we are in a period of managed decline, and it's my belief that the sustainability, security and vibrancy of this island requires vigorous improvement if we are to meet our island plan. Thank you.
Somebody to second?
I'm aware. Anyway, Mr. President, I'm pretty sure I haven't made a second.
Didn't say it was about.
Does anyone wish to comment on this debate? Ms. Harry.
I wish to second the motion. A good transport communication infrastructure creates social cohesion, allowing everyone north to south to be able to fully engage in developing our nation. It is now clear that there is in fact a division between our communities, with some communities well served and integrated into the Isle of Man's public transport system, and those who are not. It is also important, if we are to develop a sustainable island, that there is a requirement for this system to be a well-planned combination that integrated buses, a safe and secure cycle infrastructure, pedestrian-friendly routes. This would encourage people to use public transport, take bikes to work and school, encourage visitors all year round. This will promote healthier and more active lifestyles, reduce stress and mental health problems, and contribute to a cleaner and greener Isle of Man for future generations.
You were an opportunity to reply to the vote. What was there? Oh, Mr. Cohen, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to begin today with saying that I agree with all points made by the honourable members and the honourable member for Garth, and I'd like to thank you for bringing this motion forward today. Firstly, can I turn my attention to transport? The well-publicised reduction in bus fares to a £2 fare outside of Douglas did do very much to stimulate the use of public transport. However, for the same cost, we could have made free bus travel for all under 25s on the island, which I believe would do three main things. It would support an age group that isn't economically well off. It would support families travelling with their children, and it would help reach some of our climate goals by reducing the use of personal transport in favour of public transport. Next up, I'd like to talk about the Isle of Man Steam Packet Company. Previously, the Steam Packet was owned by various banks and pension funds, which had business models to maximise profit, which for the time was acceptable. However, as of 2018, the Isle of Man government has been the major and only shareholder of the Steam Packet. As a state-owned service, it is vital that the livelihoods of the Manx people is no longer acceptable for the ferry service to continue profiting off those who require travel off-island with their cars. Perhaps this should be reviewed and there should be a reduced residence there to allow people to travel affordably. Thirdly, I'd like to talk about driving licences. Schools have taken this decision to restrict pupils leaving school to take driving lessons during school time, even if it falls during a private study session. However, many employers on island and off require a full driver's license as a requirement for employment. It is my view that schools should change their policies to see this as an essential enrichment activity and an employability skill. And so I believe schools should allow students to take time off as due to the shortage of driving instructors, which means that students must be flexible to fit in their lessons. Secondly, I'd like to turn my attention to connectivity. Whilst there may be fibre connection running near to a house, if you simply cannot afford this, you are no more connected than anyone else. The Manx government currently judges connectivity by how close fibre is to a house, when it should really be how many houses in an area can afford it. During COVID, Isle of Man schools handed out laptops to students to allow for students to continue their studies and themselves paid for the internet connections of those households to ensure that connectivity. I'd like to further propose that the government consider free or heavily discounted broadband to any household with members in full-time education. Thank you very much.
Come on, Ms. Spirit.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to agree with Mr. Coward about what he said with the steam pipe company. As someone with a personal link to the person who works there, I can just say, especially with the economic side of it, it's completely just inaccessible to the Manx people. Over the TT period, a single person and bike going on the Memory Creek was £700 plus. For a staff leisure ticket, it's £5. I could go on to boat with £5 and go to Liverpool. It's just, and Manxton, it fits over 800 people. Only about 200 or 300 of the seats are free access. The cabin fares have gone up. There's all these lounges, but you have to pay for them, and with the cost of living crisis, it's going to be increasingly difficult for people to get off the island as residents. People coming here with TT to improve the economics of the island. So I'd like to ask, are there any plans on the Manxton to make it more economically sustainable?
Call on Mr. Gallagher.
Thank you, Mr. President. In relation to transport, I would like to raise a point about road haulage equivalency for freight on the Isle of Man. I would like to know whether it is just for freight leaving the Isle of Man, or is it for freight coming from the UK or Ireland to the Isle of Man. And if anyone's unsure what road haulage equivalency is where a transport freight is charged by the same cost as it would be on land, plus a small extra charge to make this is to make freight more affordable to ship across the Irish Sea, and it will make it easier for many local businesses to be more competitive, and in particular Manx farming to be more competitive and able to send its crops to the UK mainland, as the Ramsey Bakery, which has been a major customer for many arable farmers, has now closed down. The road haulage equivalency would allow them to ship their crop to the UK mainland in an economically viable way. Thank you.
Call the mover to reply before we vote. Would you have an opportunity to reply?
No.
Your prerogative. Right, honourable members, we come to a vote on this item, item 2, as laid out on the board of paper. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. The ayes have it. The division called, so you know how to vote on your buttons. Just wait, clerk will have the on screen ready. Then you can vote.
Just go around pressing all buttons.
Now then, subject to the interference of the Deputy Speaker in the far corner, in the House of Keys is 20 votes for and 1 against.
Legislative Council, 6 for, 1 against, therefore motion carried. So now we move on to item 3, free school meals, and I call on the Honourable Member for Garth. Ms. Reader again.
Thank you, Mr. President. Junior Tynwald, it is my belief that the Isle of Man should look to provide free school meals for all students in our school. Good nutrition plays a vital role in a child's development. Science shows us that a healthy diet promotes concentration, memory, and overall academic performance. Free school meals also eliminate disadvantages that many children face due to inadequate nutrition. It will be argued that the upfront cost is prohibitive. However, this short-term thinking fails to make a clear cost-benefit analysis in the long term. Improved cognition, better health outcomes, lower levels of obesity will mean that we have a better educated workforce who will make better decisions on lifestyle, and it will clearly lead to a more healthy population who will reduce pressures on the National Health Service. At the present time, when children have access to a healthy school meal, it eases the financial strain on families, freeing up resources that can be used for other essential needs. Parents will be more able to contribute towards other education-related expenses, extracurricular activities, and even basic necessities, leading to an overall improvement in the quality of life for entire families. If we make the move to introduce free school meals, it will not be us simply providing a meal. It will be an investment in our children's well-being, education, and future success. Providing every child a nutritious meal will not only level the playing field, but will be able to foster a sense of community with all of us in it together, and it will create a brighter future for our island. Thank you.
Seconder, Ms. Parry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wish to second the motion. Our island plan has at its heart strategies that unite and develop cohesion within our communities, rather than allow the opportunities for division to build within our community. The provision of school meals to all young people gives them the greatest of opportunities to develop. The key word of the plan is the word secure. This will allow us to build an education system that supports everyone. It also has the word vibrant at its heart, and free school meals will mean that we provide excellent educational opportunities for all. Healthy diets lead to better cognition and academic performance, meaning that young people will better understand how to look after and nurture our island. Therefore, I believe that the provision of school meals is something that the government should put into place for our children. Thank you.
So, did you wish to speak? Please.
Thank you, Mr. President. While I was doing research about the number of children that are already entitled to free school meals, this is through the Employed Persons Allowance, Job Seeker Allowance, and Income Support. I found that while numbers of children at school have grown since before the cost of living crisis in 2018, the numbers of children actually on free school meals has decreased. So I'm just wondering, is there actually a need for this? Because the demand hasn't increased, so why should the supply increase?
Remember, Mr. King.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for bringing this subject to us this morning. And if I could perhaps suggest or request the Education Minister makes a contribution. It is essential that young people have access to nutritional, good meals once a day. The principle of why school meals were introduced in the first place was to ensure that every student, every young person on the island could have a wholesome, nutritious meal and a drink. And the situation we have at the moment, and honourable members here today would have greater insight, is perhaps the school meals are not always the most nutritious, that there are levels of ultra-processed food, perhaps more than we would like to see. And also, is the cost of school meals unaffordable for some, but actually, is the content and the quality of the food that is available being reduced? Because the cost, as I understand it, of a school meal is below what most people would pay for a cup of coffee or a drink in one of the many establishments around the island. So, should we have a rethink? Would the Department for Education, Sport and Culture think that a review is necessary into our school meals? And would it be less costly to make the school meals free to all those in education, at both primary and secondary, even if that was a particular meal allowing for some special dietary needs? And also, my experience is that any student with who is vegetarian or vegan, especially at primary level, has very, very limited choice of just a baked potato practically every day. So I think this is an excellent motion for the Honourable Member to bring. and I would completely endorse, school meals should be provided to more of the student population for no cost, no charge to the students. And I don't want to see that money come out of the education budget. I think that the Isle of Man needs a rethink in what is available. And the final point that I would like to see is that school meals contain more Manx produce, so that more of our local Manx produce finds its way into the school system. And once again, that schools could produce the meals that they serve rather than reheating what is provided. And there is a huge need, I would say, for improvements in this area. Thank you, Mr. President.
Well, the Honourable Member Dr. Hayward.
Thank you, Mr. President. I did some background looking into this, and there is data that's been provided in written questions by the Department of Education. It turns out that there are just over 19% of our primary school children already receiving free school meals. However, that drops to 14% in secondary schools. And I think this is somewhat associated with stigma, because it doesn't seem to me that the need for free school meals will be less necessary in secondary schools. I think my other concern then is that we perhaps don't have clear visibility on the children for whom this is an essential part of their nutrition in a day, and that we may be missing some of those children. In some primary schools, the situation is really unbalanced. Over half the children in certain schools have free school meals, whereas it's less than 10% in others. So I think this really is an issue related to poverty and to food poverty. It's particularly concerning because we've seen the rate of inflation in food prices recently, that we will be pushing those families further into food poverty and unable to feed their children properly. And I also wonder about whether it is possible to consider that this is not just a school-time problem. This is a problem that persists during holiday as well. We have seen measures in the past. During COVID, we saw vouchers issued, and in an initial response to the cost of living crisis, we did make some moves around that. But we seem to have lost sight of that problem and be quite content to ignore the fact that with 7 weeks coming up where those children won't be in school now, those receiving free school meals, they may not be getting a nutritious meal during the day. Thank you.
Well, the Honourable Minister for Education, Sport and Culture.
Thank you, Mr. President. I did intend to join in the debate, but thank you, Mrs. Cambridge, for inviting me to. And obviously, ensuring that our students have a nutritious meal at lunchtime is a key objective within our schools. The health of our pupils is of paramount importance, and the department regularly reviews its primary school meal options in order to ensure that we are fulfilling daily nutritional requirements. Primary school catering team consults with public health, a dietitian and an officer from the department before implementing any menu changes within the primary setting. However, ultimately all changes are decided and implemented by the department, and that's done through a departmental meeting. I have launched a full review into school meals following question in the other honourable court in the House of Keys. That is ongoing, and that would be a full school meals review and rebranding. And this is being taken up by one of my honourable colleagues, Mrs. Christian, so that is ongoing. With regards to the prices of meals, it is a strict criteria that free school meals are made available, and they're linked to income-related benefits from the Treasury. So that's income-based job seekers allowance, employed persons allowance, or income support. Therefore, any reasonable adjustment to the free school meals is based on this eligibility to benefits, and we use this criteria as for justification for the allowance for free school meals. The free school meals allowance was implemented and is calculated to enable the children and students to obtain 2 courses of midday meal, excluding drinks, as water is available in all of our schools. A range of drinks are available to purchase if desired within cash cafeterias, and that's in the secondary schools and at University College of Man setting. With regards to Honourable Member for Russians comments with regard to the percentage within primary and secondary, and whether it was possibly a stigma. I can report that all of our schools have a card system for free school meals, so no student's identifiable as being on a free school meal, and that was brought in It was back in 2012. I was actually a member of the leadership team at Balcomine High School that implemented that, and I was the first school to implement it, and it's now throughout all of our school systems. But that was to remove any stigma around preschool meals, so no student should be identifiable because it's an allowance on a card, the same as any other student that puts funding on that. But most important for me as the Minister is to make sure we've got the right environment, the right quality of food for our students available at lunchtime that helps support the biggest effect for the student in their education. And there's been lots of comments today with regards to being able to concentrate and making sure that we have everything available to our students and the infrastructure there. Many members may not know that school meals previously was cooked on most premises, and we did have kitchens available in all of our schools. Previous governments chose to take the kitchens out of some of our schools, and it would be great expense to put that back. So the key of doing this full review of school meals is to make sure we can deliver good, wholesome, healthy meals that are aligned to the Food Standards Agency. And also there's further questions in Tynwald this week with regards to this, but we have launched that review. I think it was back in March, and that is ongoing, and we will make sure that that's well publicised. And I'm happy for anybody here today or anybody that would like to discuss school meals with me to get in touch. Thank you, Mr. President.
Honourable Member Mrs. Court.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to play devil's advocate here and ask honourable members today whether they think targeted intervention would be better than blanket provision. Providing free school meals for all would come at a considerable continuing cost. So I just ask members, is that the best use of very limited resources we have at the moment, or should it be targeted to those who need it most? Thank you, Mr. President.
Member Mrs. Kinch.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just, at a small point, just building on the data provided by the Honourable Member for Russia around stigma between the percentages of primary schools, 19%, versus the percentages for secondary schools at 14%. I note the point made by the Minister about lunch cards, which destigmatised access to free school meals. And I wonder whether there's a change or a difference in that data, because some schools have policies which allow certain student year groups off-site during lunch hours, therefore the demand may not be the same for those individuals. Thank you, Mr. President.
Honourable Member Mr. Clark.
Thank you, Mr. President. Whilst I agree with fundamental points of the motion, I disagree with the wording. The motion states that free school meals should be provided to more students, including, if possible, primary school students. However, I believe that all students, including all primary school students, have the right to free school food, as this would make schools much more equal and remove any existing stigma surrounding those activities.
Honourable Member Mr.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would instead like to politely disagree with the Minister of Education that in fact lunch cards do not prevent stigmatisation. Personally, at St Beans High School, if a student wishes to purchase an item at break time, they then cannot afford to purchase a full meal as of lunchtime. So that means they would only say have a croissant at break and then a sandwich at lunch. And I see this as a major barrier to people accepting free school meals. Thank you.
Mr. Cowan.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to pick up on a comment that the Education Minister made before when she stated that water isn't always available in schools. Can I just ask, when will this be addressed?
This is really for the mover to actually reply at the end of the debate, and we'll be voting. You're not asking a question of the Minister. This is a motion. Anyone else wish to contribute? The mover has the right and opportunity to reply. Do you wish to respond, Ms. Reader?
Yes, please. I would just like to say in regards to the point that was made about not having a blanket program for everyone. I think that because of the stigma that is in that there is about people having free school meals, I think it would possibly be difficult for families in that situation to come forward and request personal help that just applies to them and families similar. So I think a blanket an opportunity for everyone to have the same would help with reducing the stigma. So that means that families who do not feel comfortable in disclosing their financial difficulties or the situation that they are in, make it easier for them to access help and not feel like they have the stigma put upon them. Thank you.
Well, members, we come to vote on this item, item 3, as laid out on the order paper. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no.
No.
Guys?
Aye.
This is the big call.
Shown in the House of Keys, 18 votes for, 3 against.
Legislative Council, 6 for, none against, therefore motion carried. So that, honourable members, concludes our sitting of Junior Tynwald. Can I congratulate you all for this morning. Those who have contributed, I'd say you've been very well considered with your views, well scripted, you've been relevant, you've been topical, you've been articulate, you've been challenging and penetrating, and I congratulate you for that. Those who didn't participate, I want to thank you too, because you have also been part of the political process, because you have voted, and because you have voted, you've actually been part of the decision making, which is what politicians do.